Okay, so this is a live stream. I am live. My name is Matt Beat, known online as Mr. Beat. I used to be known in the classroom as Mr. Beat. And my first series that I made on YouTube that was watched by just people that were not my students was my presidential elections in American history series. People watched it for fun back in 2016. Meanwhile, I had taught I was teaching high school social studies, economics, American government, American history, and we predicted who would be the president in 2016 to my amazement. And that's what we're going to do tonight using the same methods. But I brought in special guests to help predict who will be the next president of the United States. As you all know, uh, this election coming up here in less than 2 months, we have the two main major party candidates, Kamala Harris. I'm starting to sound like Republicans by the way I say her name now. I've been listening to too many Republican streams. Anyway, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and it's been a crazy election. The video that I will be making is going to be a crazy episode for sure. If you want to get caught up, you can watch I put the playlist in the description. I also have my book here, the Ultimate Presidential Election book. Every election in American history is in there. But no, a lot of you are not here for me or for any of that. You are here for my special guests. So I'm going to bring them on here. I have the Lichtmans here. And let's all give them a warm welcome. Here we go.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time. I know you've had a long day, especially Allan. I was watching your other live stream you just did.
Oh, you knew I ran 6 miles today.
Yes, and no big deal. Taught a class and was also like on other media outlets. But yeah, so if you don't know who Allan Lichtman is here, he's kind of a legend. He's kind of a big deal. He's an American political historian, teaches at American University in Washington, D.C., which I was there actually last year. It would have been cool to meet you in person, maybe someday. But yeah, claim to fame are his 13 keys to the White House. First came up with them, in the 1980s? Is that right?
81.
The year I was born. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so I didn't find out about you until 2016.
Right.
And that was when a lot of people found out about you, I think. And you've really just become a really credible source for predicting American presidential elections. I mean, experts oftentimes are just people who know their stuff so well that they can predict the future. They can be these fortune tellers. And so I think you should be honored that so many people tune in to you now on your YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to their YouTube channel. Speaking of which, the gentleman on the upper right-hand corner on the screen there is his son, Sam Lichtman, who, by my understanding, you run that channel. And yeah, I was right. I knew.
Yes.
I assumed correctly. But yeah, so they just got done live streaming over there. And if you haven't caught a live stream by these two, it's incredible. I love it. I've been tuning into you guys for a few months, the last few months. Just the dynamic between you two is really fun to watch. And especially considering that Sam, I don't know, how much do you know about American politics? How much are you in this world?
I'm not in this world in my day-to-day life at all. I work in film and media and communications, and in my day-to-day life, I don't work in it at all. I know quite a bit just because my dad is Allan Lichtman, and growing up, he rubbed off that political itch a little bit onto me.
Mom.
And my mother, of course. Yeah. But I didn't study history. I didn't study political science. None of that jazz. So, yeah, I sort of fit into the producer role on our channel and the host role, and trying to just add a little bit of, maybe, like you said, some dynamic between us, some comedy between us. But I know enough, again, being the son of my parents, to hold my own a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know time is precious here, so let's get right into it. Dr. Lichtman, if you could just like for those in my audience who are not familiar with your 13 keys at all, could you just introduce them
Sure.
to everyone? Yeah.
Thank you, Max. All right, here's the thing. The keys to the White House: pay no attention to the pundits. They're my buddies and they're smart, but they have no scientific basis for their opinions, no track record in successful predictions. They ignore the polls, which are snapshots, and are abused by clerks like Nate Silver, who compile polls and often are wrong, like he was in 2016. Instead, the keys to the White House, my prediction system, the 13 keys, taps into the structure of how American presidential elections really work as votes up or down on the strength and performance of the White House party. And that's what the keys gauge. And there is a simple decision rule. The keys are phrased as true-false questions, where an answer of true always favors the White House party, and an answer of false favors their being booted out of power. And if 6 or more questions are false, the White House party is a predicted loser. This system has been right since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982, nearly 3 years ahead of time, in the midst of what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression, when his approval ratings were down in the gutter. And of course, as Mr. Beat says, I was not very popular in 90% plus Washington, D.C., that's Democratic, when I predicted Trump to win in 2016. But the point is, my predictions are scientific. They have nothing to do with my personal political views. So keep in mind, 6 false keys, and the White House party is a predicted loser. Fewer than 6, they're a predicted winner. And the keys look at things like midterm elections, incumbency, internal party battles for the White House party, third parties, short and long-term economy, policy change, social unrest, scandal, foreign/military failure and success. And only 2 keys have anything to do with the candidates, and they're very high threshold keys, asking whether the candidates are one of those once-in-a-generation, inspirational, broadly transformational candidates like Franklin Roosevelt or Ronald Reagan. And again, these are the keys. It's governing, not campaigning, that counts. That's why I introduced my predictions before this what was then an upcoming presidential debate.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pull up your 13 keys here in a moment. But before we do that, really 3 things popped into my head when you were talking just now. First of all, everybody looks at the polls. I always joke around that it's like a drug addiction. You're just like the true political science junkies that are all here watching right now. They're always checking sites like 538. But you made a really good point that I want to stress, that this is just a snapshot. This is just a moment in time. It's when we're talking about a broader, bigger picture, this can be quite a distraction, no?
Yes, and the other thing is, the error margin of the polls is far greater than they would have you believe, the plus and minus 3%. That's pure statistical error. That's the error you would get if you had a huge jar of green and red balls and you pulled out a sample to estimate the percentage of green and red balls in the jar. But human beings are not green and red balls. Most people don't respond to pollsters. People may lie. They may not have focused on the election yet and won't change their minds. They may tell pollsters what they think they want to hear. And critically, no one has voted yet. So they got to guess at the likely voters, and every pollster has a different way of guessing. Finally, one pollster just the other day said, look, the real margin of error is 9 points. You have no confidence unless the gap between the 2 candidates is 10 points or more, which renders all these polls noise.
Dang, that's incredible. The other
Breaking news: people are not green and red balls. Breaking news directly from Allan Lichtman right there.
Right from the prediction professor himself.
So yeah, I guess we just need to stop looking at all these dang polls. Then I guess is the lesson.
They are addictive. I'll give you that.
Like a drug. But okay, 2 other things before I forget. One, you have not hidden the fact over the years that you are a member of the Democratic Party, that you generally favor Democratic party candidates. I have always been a unaffiliated or independent, but my audience at this point knows that I do not like Donald Trump, that I think he's one of the worst presidents in American history. I think it's important that our audience knows these biases ahead of time. Do you want to say anything about that, like before?
Yes,
Okay, yeah. How
I
does
do
that?
have my political views. I don't
Yeah, yeah.
hide them. But the critical thing about my predictions is they're predictions, not endorsements. They have nothing to do with my political views. My first prediction was Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
the most conservative president at that point since the 1920s. My most controversial prediction, which made me kind of a pariah percent plus Washington, D.C., Democratic, was Donald Trump. So I predicted the two most conservative presidents of our time, along with more liberals like Obama and now Harris. So my predictions have zero to do with my political point of view. In fact, I always give anyone who wants to be a forecaster of any kind the following advice. Here's the advice to be a successful forecaster. Got no history, but that ain't it. Got no politics, but that ain't it. Got to know math, but that ain't it. The secret is keeping your own personal political views out of it. If I predicted according to my personal political views, I'd be useless as a forecaster. You might as well flip a coin as listen to me. But because my predictions are analytic and total nonpartisan, they actually have some real meaning.
Yeah, and just to kind of clarify on 2016, this is the I tweeted this out earlier today that you've got 9 out of the last 10 elections predicted correctly. 2000 was the exception, but really, I mean, that was Al Gore, who, many people argue that he really was the one who won that one. I started making my predictions in 2016. Both you and I predicted that Donald Trump would win, even though we were not Donald Trump fans. I used economic data, which I'll be sharing here at the end of this stream. You used your 13 keys. I think, yeah, like that does something. I mean, that says a lot about credibility. Also, though, like it is quite incredible that this election year it seems to be like a year that is just, I don't know, going against a lot of trend, like going against a lot of history. It seems like, I mean, who would have thought that we would be in the situation now, right? Like with Joe Biden dropping out so late in the race after winning primaries. How much did that influence like your 13 keys? Because I saw you on Twitter, like you were worried about Biden. Like you were saying Biden should not drop out. So like what made you change your mind about that?
Yeah. Let me first give the big answer. And that is my favorite comedian is the late, great Gilda Radner. And her character, Rosanna was famous for saying, there's always something. Every year there's something unique, and some critic says you have to change your keys. We have an African American running. Never had that before. America's not ready for an African American. We have a woman running. Never had that before. We have a presidential candidate on tape bragging about grabbing women by their private parts. Never had that before. And of course, this year we have a incumbent president very late dropping out. And I have 3 answers to that. Answer number 1 is you can't change a system on the fly. That is a recipe for error. Answer number 2 is the keys, although they're based on history. I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball or Speaker Mike Johnson who claims the Almighty talks to him. I'm an historian. But the keys are incredibly robust. Developmentally, they go all the way back to 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, when we had no automobiles, no planes, no radio, no television. We're an agricultural society. Women didn't vote. African Americans were enslaved. The electorate was almost entirely white males, 21 years and over. So the keys have endured through vastly greater changes in our society, our economy, our politics, our demography than anything we've seen in recent years. Third answer is the keys fully take into account what happened with Biden and the transition to Harris. I had warned against what the Democrats were doing for several reasons. First, I thought it was absurd that the Democrats were openly and publicly, right out there, trashing their sitting president. I've never seen that before. I also thought that spineless Democrats were going to push Biden out and lose the incumbency key, but fatally also have a big party brawl and pile on top of that the loss of the contest key. No White House party has ever been reelected since 1900 when they lost both those keys. But they grew a spine, they grew a brain, they united behind Harris, which meant only one key was lost. It was an open seat, but incumbents often win when there's an open seat, like Herbert Hoover in 1928 or George H.W. Bush in 1988. So the keys fully took into account exactly what happened with the transition. Finally, as a general point, I'm not so arrogant to say that even the patterns of 60 years couldn't be changed by something cataclysmic. But the point is, you would never know until after it happens. You can't change your system beforehand.
Exactly. See, I was going to actually ask you a follow up to that, because you say they're robust, but you're a man of science. You're a historian. Of course, you're going to, like, you're still curious that, oh, wow, that's exciting that we had a curveball in there this time around. I'm going to have to adjust things after the fact. Yeah, thank you that's a great answer. Let's just dive right into the 13 keys. And yeah, Sam, feel free to jump in anytime. Don't be shy now.
This is way sharper than I am. You know, he's young and sharp. I'm old and doddering.
Okay, and also before I share the 13 keys tracker here, I just want to point out that the evidence that I rely on, the economic evidence, is also robust. It's been accurate going back to the 1940s, not as far back as 1860s. So the 13 keys is probably
that's pretty good, better than almost any other forecaster.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think together, I mean, you put everything we're piling on top of each other here tonight, I think we've got a pretty solid case. But yeah, so here is, anybody can visit this. I put the link in the description. We're just going to go through it briefly, as quickly as we can. And if you want to explain, like, where we're at this moment, I know it's 9 of the 13 keys, I believe, favor Harris.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm ready to go.
One through one. Yeah, I'll just fill it out here. Go ahead. Key 1, midterm gains.
Well, before I actually hit the keys, a very quick point.
Sure.
I get 10 emails a day from people who claim we know better how to call the keys. So my answer to that is, if you want to develop your own prediction system based on how you call factors, go right ahead. But if you're going to use my system, you got to stick to how each key is defined and how the keys have been rated ever since 1860. So let's go. Mandate key number 1. That's based on U.S. House elections. The Democrats lost House seats in 2022, despite doing better than expected. That key is false.
Okay. So that's
key number 2. Contest key. As I explained, they got smart, avoided a contest by uniting behind Harris. The key is true. Key number 3, incumbency key, obviously with Biden stepping down. That key is false. Key number 4, third party. And here's the only time I ever have to use polls, because I don't know whether a candidate is going to get 5% or more of the vote to turn that key, but I don't take them at face value. We have the Lichtman wasted vote syndrome. I love you, RFK Jr., but you can't win. So when I actually vote, I'm not going to vote for you. So he'd have to be polling at least at 10%. He's totally, which I think is partly because of Harris, since the voters don't have to decide anymore between 2 old white guys. Hate to say that, being an old white guy myself, but I think it's fact. I think that key is true. Next key, short-term economy. I've heard all this talk, people are unhappy with the economy. There's inflation. Of course, you can counter that, as you know, with the stock market or jobs, but that's not how the key is defined. The key is a very quantitative key. There is no recession in the election year. There is no recession. There's no way in less than 2 months a recession will grip the country. That key is true. The long-term economic. Yeah,
People are always coming into our chat saying, but people perceive the economy like this, or people are saying the economy is that. These keys have nothing to do with public perception, right?
Right.
absolutely nothing. It's a quantitative key. Now, if you want to develop a system based on public perception, I encourage it. Go right ahead. But I've never seen such a system that has predictive
Well,
value.
I don't think my prediction is that won't work.
No, it will not work. It's never worked. And people like to criticize, but they're not going to do the hard work of developing their own system. All right. Next one, long-term economy, also quantitative, was economic growth, real per capita during the term at least equal to the average of the previous two terms. It's been double. That key is clearly true. We now get to policy change. Clearly, huge changes in policy between Trump and Biden. You know, Biden rescinding a lot of the executive orders on immigration and the environment, the CHIPS bill, the infrastructure bill, the stimulus bill, the inflation and climate bill, the rejoining the Paris Accords on climate change. Huge changes. That key is true.
So completely blue, solid blue.
That's solid blue.
Okay.
It's not going to change. Social
Yeah.
unrest. Sam, is there big social unrest, massive enough to call into question the stability of the country?
No, it has to be widespread and sustained for this key to flip.
And what have we had instead of that?
Sporadic protests, not reaching the numbers that could flip this key. I mean, we're talking about millions of people across the country would have to would be needed to flip this key, right, Dad?
You're right on the money, as always. That key is solid blue.
And I was at the DNC. I was expecting much bigger protests for the people of Gaza, and I think that Harris has made it so that she's trying to like toe that line, and she's done, trying to appease both sides of it. I think she's done fairly well with that.
I think you're right. I think, again, the switch to Harris, just as it had a positive effect for Democrats on third party, has had a positive effect on Democrats on social unrest, both because of what you say and because the protests are directed against Biden, who's no longer front and center. It's now Harris front and center, much harder to get enthusiasm to protest against her. We then come to my favorite key, the scandal key. Sam, is Biden complicit in a major acts of corruption?
This is one that we get pushed back a lot on, Mr. Beat. People
Really?
say, yeah, because people talk about Hunter Biden a lot. They talk about, all these cases that the Congress, the House is bringing up against Biden. But as my dad states very clearly, right, there are these very clear thresholds for these keys. The scandal key, it has to be bipartisan, right? It can't be just Republicans who are going after Biden.
Yep.
And it has to be directed towards the president directly. It can't be Hunter Biden. It can't be some peripheral person in his administration.
It can't even be a son. It couldn't be Billy Carter, the reprobate brother of Jimmy Carter. As Sam says, it's got to hit the president himself. And Republicans have come up empty. Even their smoking gun witness, you might remember this, Mr. Beat, Mr. Smirnoff, supposedly had the goods on Biden. He was arrested by the FBI for lying about Biden and for propagating Russian propaganda. That key is solid blue.
And we're almost in the post-scandal era, I think. After Trump, it feels like scandals don't have as much, they don't really phase us as much as they used to. Maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe Trump has inured us to corruption, I think, but I can't change the key, obviously. All right, we now come to the two shakiest keys, the foreign/military failure and success. Got two wars raging. Wars are always uncertain, right? They're fluid. We know about the vicissitudes of war, so these are hard to call. But I split them, which I think is accurate. I count the foreign policy failure key as false. They haven't avoided a failure because of Gaza. It's a humanitarian disaster with no end in sight, no ceasefire, no hostage release. I understand we don't have boots on the ground, but we are deeply invested in the Middle East. I count that one red.
Key 10?
As I said, though.
Are you going likely red or certainly red, Dad?
Lightly red, but very close to certainly, because the one way that could be reversed, how could that be reversed, Sam? What could Biden do? Unlikely.
Right, a peace deal in Gaza, but
Ceasefire.
Yeah, which I think
ceasefire.
is, given that he's got to deal with the belligerent Netanyahu and the impossible Hamas, I just don't see it. So I give Gaza red, and I give the other success blue for Ukraine. It was Biden and Biden alone who put together the coalition of the West, not Merkel or Trudeau or Macron. It was Biden who put together the coalition of the West that stopped Putin cold from conquering Ukraine and then going on, as he would have, to threaten our NATO allies. And Biden's continuing support has enabled Ukraine to survive for over 2.5 years. No one expected that, and even to make incursions into Russian territory. I think this will go down historically as a great presidential achievement. So I give that one blue.
So solid blue?
I would say light blue, because, the vicissitudes of war.
I do have to push back a little bit here, because I do know that many Republicans argue that we should have nothing to do with that war. We should stop sending weapons. But you're viewing more long-term, right? Like you're thinking like, oh, in 50 years, we're going to look back and like be like, oh, that was actually a very brilliant.
Very important. Plus, if you look at the most recent polling, this isn't horse race polling. This is what people think. There was a huge surge of support for Ukraine. The Republican position is very much of a minority position, and it is even held by all Republicans. There's the Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, group of more internationally oriented Republicans. All right,
bipartisan.
Last two keys, the charisma keys.
Yeah.
Remember, these are really high threshold. You have to be a broadly appealing, transformational, once in a generation type of candidate. Only been about half a dozen of them since 1900, and you know who they are. They're not hard to find, right? Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, because he was a war hero. It's charisma/hero key. John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Barack Obama in 2008. That's it. Over 120 years. Whatever you may think of Harris, she hasn't really had time and isn't established yet as a Franklin Roosevelt. So that one is red. And finally, the challenging party candidate is not charismatic or a national hero. Obviously, the guy who got out of service for Bone Spurs is not a national hero, but there are those who think he's charismatic. And indeed, they're right. He's a great showman, but he doesn't fit the definition of the keys, which is matters, not what you think of him. He is not a broadly appealing transformational candidate. His showmanship appeals only to a narrow base, which doesn't fit the definition of the key. As president, his approval rating on average was 41%, right at the bottom, historically, of all presidents. He lost the popular vote in 2 consecutive elections by a combined 10 million votes. Reagan and FDR won 6 combined elections by landslides. That one is solid blue.
Okay. So there you have it. It was just like we said earlier, 9 true statements and 4 false. So this means that Harris wins. If you want to play around with this tool, like I said, a link to it is in the description of this video. Everybody already knew this, though. If they know anything about Allan Lichtman, they know that, he's already made his predictions, and you did last week. I'm glad I'm talking to you now after some of that fanfare is over with, because I think, the one that I always look at the most are those keys 5 and 6. And I know there's different economic data you can look at. There are perceptions, as Sam brought up, the fact that there's a lot of people, many of them happen to be Republicans, that have this perception that the economy is not strong right now. Primarily, I would argue, because they are still thinking about the high inflation of recent years. Despite inflation cooling in the last few months, they still remember those 2019 prices. I don't know. Do I think, like, before I show you my predictions, I want to hear from you guys. Do you think that maybe I care about the economy too much? Maybe James Carville was wrong when he said, is the economy stupid?
James Carville was definitely wrong and has been wrong for decades. He made his name on one thing and one thing only, and has been trading on that for over 30 years. It's not the economy. If that was the case, Hillary Clinton should have easily won in 2016. There was nothing particularly bad about the economy. It was a very decent economy. We were in the midst of an uprising recovery from the recession of 2008. Hubert Humphrey should have won in a landslide against Richard Nixon in 1968. As you know, Mr. Beat, the 1960s economy were perhaps the best economy this nation has ever seen. So sometimes it's the economy, sometimes it isn't. That's why I have 13 indicators and not 2.
Just a little pushback on 1968. Inflation was creeping up in 1968. Although you were right, though, like the big trends where the economy was still strong. And same thing with 2016. It's like overall, yeah, it was like that slow, long recovery after the Great Recession. However, there was just slight changes.
But you could point to slight imperfections in the economy every single year. Come on. You never know which of them is big enough.
I'm so glad that you like disagree with this. So, because now I want to show you like, and I want to get your reaction too. This is totally what I wanted. So yeah, like there's the thumbnail. So when I taught economics, I started the economics class at the high school I taught at in 2015. And the first, I'll never forget having those students like, oh, here's a fun lesson that I found through the St. Louis Federal Reserve. They had these free lessons for economics teachers. And they said, hey, did you know that you could predict who's going to be the next president of the United States by just looking at this specific economic data? And the three things were something you already mentioned, Allan, was GDP per capita growth, the inflation rate, and the unemployment rate. And
Ronald Reagan's misery index, right?
That's so that was mentioned a lot, definitely in the 1980s. But I had my students, just to kind of show them how it worked. Go back to the 1940s when they first started tracking this, and then they actually like looked at who won the election, and sure enough, like if the economic indicators were in a positive direction, then whoever the incumbent party candidate was won the presidential election. And so the first thing that we looked at was the misery index, which is simply just the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate. Obviously, misery index, you don't want misery. Misery sucks. I mean, unless you're I'm not going to get into that.
We won't talk about masochists here. Come on.
Yeah. So you want the misery index to go down from the previous year. And it's always comparing it to the previous year. So what you do is you take the average inflation rate for the entire previous year, not by month. And you also take the entire unemployment rate for the previous year.
When you say the previous year, do you mean
I looked it up.
Election?
Yeah, I pulled it all up. And so the misery index rule says that the incumbent political party usually wins if the misery index has not gone up in the election year compared to the previous year. Now, the misery index rule does not always predict who will be the next president. So I go further I used to go with my students and then now on this channel. And we also look at the real GDP per capita growth rule, which says the incumbent political party usually wins if the growth rate of real GDP, which admittedly, sometimes the data isn't completely accurate because, a lot of times you don't really know this until several months or even like longer than that, what the actual GDP per capita rate is. But again, if the political party that's in power usually wins if the growth rate of real GDP per capita is increasing at a higher rate in the election year compared to the previous year.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I get all this, but here's my question. All this data is lagged, right? It's not reported at the moment. And
correct.
At what point in the election year, given the lag, can you use this prediction system?
See, that's a great question. I was going to add that as a caveat because we could actually make a prediction here and then later on realize that some of that economic data was wrong and have to adjust accordingly. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. This is going to save my butt later on if I predict wrong as well. So put both of these together, and if both the real GDP per capita goes down in the election year compared to the previous year, and the misery index has gone up in the election year compared to the previous year, the incumbent will lose. So, in other words, in 2016, we had a situation where the misery index, if I remember correctly, had actually gone down or gone up. Yes, it had gone up, but the real GDP per capita had also gone up, and so it was a mixed situation. But if you have both of these happening, then it's a guaranteed loss. And this is like, so basically, going back all the way to the 1940s, you can actually look at all the data. It's publicly available, and it's right in every single presidential election. And so I crunched the numbers in 2020. I made a video about it that everyone can go back and watch, and that's how I predicted that Joe Biden would win. Of course, that was a little bit easier in 2020. I mean, considering how crazy things were that year. But yeah, so looking at this year, 2023 compared to 2024, the average inflation rate in 2023, this is for the entire year, was 4.1%. The unemployment rate for the entire year was 3.6%, leaving us a misery index of 7.7, which again, you just simply add 4.1 plus 3.6. And then you look at now the numbers I have for this year, the inflation rate of 3.1%. I literally waited to do this live stream now because we got new inflation data. You guys know when? Just yesterday.
Just yesterday.
Yeah,
2.5.
And so that actually brought it down a little bit more.
2.5.
Yeah, so this brought it down. It was before that 2.5% inflation rate announced yesterday. The inflation rate for the entire year was 3.2. So this brought it down further. Inflation is going down. Unemployment rate has actually been inching up a little bit, but regardless, it's still fairly low. So that doesn't matter if it's inching up, according to the misery index. And so if you look at this, the misery index goes down. And so that's a good sign for who?
The incumbent.
The incumbent.
Just to clarify, the incumbent party, right? Not
Party.
the incumbent.
Party.
Yes.
Party, yeah. So
these are measured against the administration.
I do struggle with this because, like, I wonder, like, if this economic data was exactly the same, but Biden was still the nominee, I would have a hard time because I just think that Biden was a weak candidate, and so I don't know. Like,
stick to your model, man. Stick to your model.
Big what if, right?
Stick to your model, because you have no idea what would have happened if Biden stayed in.
I was going to say, and that was just my personal opinion. Okay, so real GDP per capita in 2023 was 66,755. And then this is based for 2024. The latest data we have is based on the second quarter, which showed that real GDP per capita grew to $68,088, which means we have growth, which means who's going to win this election?
Kamala Harris.
Yep, the incumbent wins.
Two great minds come to the same conclusion.
Yes, we do. So the misery index went down 0.6, just to recap here. Real GDP per capita went up $1,333. Therefore, the incumbent party wins despite, it doesn't matter that Joe Biden dropped out. It's the incumbent party.
Correct.
Because you can also say the same thing about, going back to, let's see. Yeah, from 1988 is a good example of this. George H.W. Bush winning, taking over Ronald Reagan's throne. But so I guess the caveat, again, we have to admit that the economic data could change in these final 6 or 7 weeks. We won't have that information, and we'll have new inflation data and unemployment data right before the election.
Before the election, yeah.
So yeah, I might have to do an emergency live stream. I don't know, but and then of course, like, adjustments even later after that, after the election is done. But yeah, we are reaching the same conclusion here. So my official prediction is Kamala Harris will win.
Mr. B, one of the good things, one of the great things about the keys is it's hard to move the keys, right? And I think that's what my dad pointed out, what you're talking about in terms of your keys. There's new economic data in an election year multiple times,
That you
right?
move. Yeah.
I think
Ah,
one of the good things about the keys is it's not easy to shake the keys. The keys are pretty much set in stone. They don't move, they don't waver too easily, unlike pulls, right, which are snapshots which move all the time, right? So that's what makes, I think, in my mind, the keys very effective. Is it's not easy to turn a key. It's not easy to turn keys back and forth. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
That almost never happens late in the election year. That's right.
And
So
I mean,
great
my only
minds come to
pushback.
the same answer.
Well, my only pushback on that is that, the problem with all the social sciences is that they're, a lot of times it can be subjective. Our interpretations of things can be subjective. Instead of just like looking at data, you're a lot of times you're like, okay, well, what was that really a major foreign military success? And I think you could have debates there. So what do you say about the
Yeah, I want to respond to that
Yeah,
because I've been hearing that for 40 years.
of course you have.
When I first developed the keys, I was blasted by the professional forecasters. I had
Yeah.
committed the cardinal sin of subjectivity. And my response was no, the keys are not subjective, they're judgmental. And historians make judgments all the time about history, and they're not random judgments. They're very tightly constrained, as you heard, even briefly, and they're much more detailed to find in my book, Predicting the Next President. But even quickly, you can see they're very tightly defined, and they've been answered since 1860, and the next answer must be consistent. So I denied that the keys were subjective. It took the forecasting community about 15 to 20 years, and they completely turned around 180 degrees. They suddenly realized their big fancy models that tried to be purely objective didn't work, and that the best models that worked were the models like the keys that combined so-called cut and dried indicators like real per capita growth with these judgmental indicators. And all of a sudden, the keys were the hottest thing in forecasting. Foresight, the International Journal of Applied Forecasting, devoted a whole special issue to the keys. I twice keynoted the International Forecasting Summit. I published in the Harvard Data Science Review, in the International Journal of Forecasting. I presented at the American Political Science Association. And so the keys are now thoroughly validated and accepted by the scientific community. Does that mean there's absolutely no room for judgment? No. That's one of the beauties of the keys and why they're used as a teaching tool. Because unlike ordinary models, you don't learn anything. To answer each key, you've got to go through all of American history since 1860. And that's why there's such a terrific teaching tool. But even if there is some degree of judgment, that, as the forecasting community has now recognized, is vastly outweighed by the fact that including judgmental indicators enables you to include a much wider range of indicators with better predictions.
And Mr. Beast, I mean, especially, now in the internet age, I think that's the thing that you see most often is people going online saying these keys are subjective, you're better off picking a name out of a hat, et cetera, et cetera. I see that every single day, all the time. You know what I mean? And that's why I appreciate you having us on and explaining the keys one by one, because people can then see there are definitive rules for each of these keys, which are based on hundreds of years of historical precedent, right? He's not making these rules up willy-nilly. They're based on past presidential elections and how these outcomes came to be, right? And then he made the rules, right? And yeah, I wish people would clip my dad's statement and show it to all these people who are out there saying that, oh, the keys are subjective. The keys are as good as picking a name out of a hat, because they're not subjective at all, really, right? He said at best, maybe they're judgmental, but even the judgmental keys have these very clear-cut, defined rules to them.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be saying William Howard Taft, and Jerry Ford are once in a generation inspirational candidates. It's not hard to answer these keys.
Uh, yeah, no, like, did you call me Mr. Beast, Sam? A lot of people are.
Oh shit, did I? Oh my
Nah,
goodness
it's Mr.
gracious. I'm
Bread.
sorry.
Come on now. No.
Mr. Beat. Mr. Beat. Sorry.
Hey, you look much too young to me to have been teaching school way back in 2015, but maybe I'm just getting old.
Hey, you look young for your age too. And I found out
Thank you. I've been
running.
teaching at American University for 51 years. I am the
Oh my
senior
God.
person at the university, I think.
That is amazing.
That's pretty
And
good, right?
you
Pretty
mentioned your
good.
book. I want to make sure that everybody is aware. Like you've written several books, but oh gosh, I'm gonna make sure I put it on the screen here. That's not it. Your book here, there it is. Predicting the Next President is that your latest one?
The Keys to the White House. No, that's the 2020 book.
Oh, you
I
have a
have
more
the
recent one.
2024 book now out. Same title, except it's the 2024 version is now
Oh,
out.
dang. I messed that up. But yeah, I wanted to really stress that you are very transparent about your whole process, not only in your books, but also the fact that you're on YouTube now with Sam. Like you're breaking it down. You're taking questions from the audience. So I encourage everyone to go over there. Anyone who's skeptical, because again, it's clear that you've heard criticism. Like I brought up criticisms that I know you've heard so much at this point. Now you're probably sick of hearing them. But I think a lot. When it's expected that now that you have this notoriety, like this fame of like being able to predict elections, what comes with it also are the haters, especially
Absolutely.
especially if you're telling them something they don't want to hear. So
Yeah. Mr. Beat, I'll say one thing.
Yeah.
There's one thing worse than having all the haters like I have, and that's being ignored. If you've had haters, you've made a mark.
Yeah, that's gonna help me feel better about my
Yes, it should.
And the other thing, Mr. Beast, is that the keys don't just create haters from the opposite political party you're predicting. They also take a lot of heat from mainstream media, YouTube streamers, Twitch streamers, because they kind of go against their everyday model of how they talk about elections, right? This horse race style type of discussion around elections, which is the total antithesis to the mainstream media, to streamers. They need something every day to talk about, right? But if the issue is, hey, the keys are set, they don't really move that much. These polls, these day-to-day campaigning things don't really matter that much. That crumbles their entire system.
Yeah, definitely. And please, people, if come up with a better model if you think you can, like based on. And you're definitely trolling me now, Sam. I know you're trolling me, calling me Mr. Beast again. You did it on purpose.
Did I? No, I didn't.
You did it on purpose.
Oh my God, did I do it again? Let me say something. I do not mess with Mr. Beast. I don't like that guy. If you look into him, he's done some really messed up stuff. You seem like a good guy. I like you, Mr. Beat. Okay.
I like him too, and I've never seen him before. I didn't even know who he was.
Yeah, hey, it's an honor to talk to both of you. And like I said, I've enjoyed your stream last few months, and I hope you keep doing it. You might just take next year off, I guess, but in 2028, love to if you kept doing it again, or just the heck with it, keep doing it and all the time. For those who are unaware, this past hour we've been joined by the Lichtmans, Allan Lichtman and Sam Lichtman. And if you do not know anything about Allan Lichtman in particular, just Google him and his 13 Keys to the White House. Subscribe to their channel. It's an honor to meet you both, and I just want to thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. B. Appreciate
and remember, it's at Allan Lichtman YouTube to get onto our channel.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Take care. Thank you so much for having us. We really enjoyed it, and it was great meeting you for the first time. Bye-bye.
Great to meet you as well.
Thank you, Mr. B. Appreciate it.
Bye.